Have you ever met someone who didn't want to be a role model, who didn't want the title, who didn't need the spotlight, and yet somehow became the voice of a generation? That's Kit Connor, a boy with messy curly hair, soft eyes, and a quiet strength that resonates louder than any headline. He didn't come out to change the world, but somehow, by being forced to speak his truth, he did. So let's talk about that. Not just who he is, but why he matters. And why millions of hearts have found a home in his story, even if he doesn't feel safe there yet. Let's rewind, not just to before the headlines, the debates, the outcry, but to a much quieter time. A time when Kit Connor wasn't a public figure, or a reluctant icon, or a trending hashtag. He was just a boy with a bike, a dream, and a strange little spark that made people pause. Born on March 8, 2004 in Purley, South London, Kit Sebastian Connor came into the world without a script in hand. But you'd never know it. His parents weren't actors. His home wasn't some celebrity mansion. His father worked in recruitment and his mother handled bookkeeping. Solid, grounded, British. It was the kind of household where you learned how to say please and thank you, how to take turns at the dinner table, and how to keep your feet on the ground, no matter where your head might wander. And Kit's head wandered often. He wasn't a loud kid, not the one jumping off couches or screaming in supermarkets, but there was something watchful about him, observant. Even at 5 or 6, he could pick up on someone's mood just by the way they breathed. He paid attention, not because anyone told him to, but because that's how he was built. He wasn't chasing attention. He was absorbing the world. At 8 years old, he took his first real step onto a set. Not a huge set. Not Marvel or Netflix, but enough for the cameras to start rolling and for something inside him to light up. Commercials, small TV parts, he dipped his toes in the water slowly, the way shy kids do. And every time, something pulled him deeper in. By the time he was 10, Kit had already scored a major film role in Get Santa, 2014, playing Tom Anderson, a boy on a wild adventure to help his dad get Santa Claus out of jail. Sounds like fun, right? But this wasn't just a holiday flick. It was his first taste of what it felt like to carry a story, to be the heartbeat of something. And if you watch that movie today, you can already see it. The honesty in his eyes, the subtle control in his expressions, the way he makes you feel like this impossible, magical world actually matters. Most 10-year-olds recite lines. Kit made you believe them. In the years that followed, he picked up role after role. He played young versions of iconic characters, popped up in British dramas like War and Peace and Grantchester, and voiced Pantaleimon in his Dark Materials. He even appeared in Rocketman as young Elton John. Yes, that Elton. A moment of destiny, maybe, for a kid who hadn't yet figured out how closely his own identity would one day be scrutinized. But Kit wasn't just growing as an actor, he was growing as a person. And that part, that's where things got messy. Because while audiences were falling for the soft-eyed, thoughtful teen on their screens, Kit was still in school. Still wearing a uniform, still taking exams, still trying to figure out who he was outside of all the characters he played. He went to Whitgift School in South Croydon, a selective, independent school known for its academics, its sports, and its pressure. Imagine being a teenage boy trying to study for your GCSEs while also preparing for red carpet interviews. One minute you're in math class, the next you're in a makeup chair. There's no manual for that. No one teaches you how to grow up when half your life is fiction and the other half is performance. And it takes a toll. Quietly. Because fame at that age isn't glitzy. It's weird. It's isolating. Your classmates treat you differently. Some idolize you, some resent you, most just don't know what to say. You miss birthday parties because of shoots. You skip school trips because of press tours. And while it might sound glamorous, deep down, you're just a kid who wants to belong somewhere. Anywhere. And for Kit, the one place that did feel like home, at least for a while, was acting. Not because it let him be someone else, but because it let him stop pretending to be normal. In front of a camera, the rules changed. He didn't have to be the cool kid or the funny kid or the straight-A student. He just had to be present. Real. honest. But here's where things start to shift. Because there's a moment in every young actor's life when the craft they love collides with the world's expectations. And Kit was getting closer to that moment, faster than he realized. You see, there's this thing that happens when you're talented and beautiful and sensitive. People start projecting onto you. They start reading into every glance, every movement, every role. They start deciding who you are before you've had a chance to figure it out for yourself. And that's exactly what happened next. In 2021, Netflix announced a brand new series, Heartstopper, a coming-of-age romance based on the graphic novel by Alice Oseman. Sweet, tender, and at the center of it is a character named Nick Nelson, a high school football player who slowly, gently realizes that maybe he's not straight. They cast Kit in the role, and suddenly, everything was about to change. But before we get too caught up in the storm, let's pause for a moment. Let's remember this version of Kit. A 16-year-old boy walking home in his school uniform, listening to Phoebe Bridgers or Rex Orange County on his headphones. A boy wondering if he was meant to do something meaningful, something that made people feel. A boy who has yet to put into words the things that are silently revolving inside him. Because Heartstopper is not just a role that will make him famous. It will be a role that will open the door to a new world for him. Let's be honest. Every actor dreams of that one role, the one that doesn't just boost their career, but touches lives. The kind of role that gives people hope, that makes them feel seen, that changes the conversation. But what happens when you land that role and you're only 16? That's what happened to Kit Connor. It was early 2021 when Netflix announced it had greenlit Heartstopper, a tender LGBTQ+ coming-of-age series based on the beloved graphic novels by Alice Oseman. The story? Two teenage boys, Charlie Spring and Nick Nelson, discovering their identities, their feelings, and each other. Quietly, softly, without trauma, without stereotypes. And when Kit was cast as Nick Nelson, a sweet, rugby-playing golden boy who slowly begins to question his sexuality, the internet didn't just cheer, it exploded. At first, it felt exciting. Kit had never played a lead role before. He was finally at the center of a story, this story. And he didn't take it lightly. He dove deep into the character, watched interviews, read the graphic novels front to back, spoke with Alice Oseman, who was hands-on throughout filming. He wasn't just memorizing lines, he was absorbing Nick's emotional journey like it was his own. And maybe in some ways it was. You see, Nick Nelson wasn't written to be loud or performative. He wasn't the kind of character who knew exactly who he was. He was unsure, hesitant, brave in quiet ways. The kind of boy who says, "I don't know if I like boys," and means it. A character that represented so many young people who live in the space between confusion and courage. And Kit, he played that internal battle with such rawness, such restraint, that people couldn't help but wonder, was it acting or was it something else? But hold that thought, we'll come back to that. When Heartstopper premiered in April 2022, it wasn't just a hit, it was a cultural moment. In just days, the show became one of the most watched teen series on Netflix. It soared to top 10 charts in over 50 countries. The hashtags trended. The fan edits flooded TikTok. The memes took over Twitter. But underneath all that noise, something real was happening. For the first time, thousands, no millions of young queer people saw themselves reflected on screen with softness, warmth, and joy. No tragedy, no trauma porn, just love. Awkward, innocent teenage love. And Kit, he was at the center of that wave. Nick Nelson became an instant icon. The way he stuttered through the words "I'm bi," the way his voice cracked when he said "I like you," the way he Googled "Am I gay?" Like so many viewers had done themselves, it was all heartbreakingly human. And Kit didn't just act those scenes, he lived in them. And yet, behind the scenes, the pressure started to build. The praise was loud, but so were the assumptions. Is Kit actually bi? Why hasn't he come out yet? Should a straight actor even play this role? It didn't matter that Kit was still a teenager. It didn't matter that he'd poured his whole soul into the performance. The internet wanted answers, labels, and they wanted them now. Every tweet, Every interview, every subtle glance was dissected. Fans, well-intentioned or not, started demanding he declare his sexuality publicly. And when he didn't, the backlash began. Some accused him of queerbaiting, claiming he was benefiting from LGBTQ+ representation without actually being part of the community. Others said he was hiding, pretending, capitalizing. Imagine that. You're 17, you just starred in the most vulnerable, honest role of your life. And instead of being celebrated, you're being picked apart, judged, pressured to define yourself before you're even ready to whisper those truths to yourself. And it wasn't just online noise. Kit felt it deeply because he wasn't pretending. He just wasn't ready. In later interviews, he would say he felt like a pawn, used by others to make a point he never volunteered for. He once said, "It's the first time I've ever felt like I couldn't control my own narrative. Like people were speaking for me before I knew what to say." And honestly, can you blame him? Because here's the part most people forget. Acting is not autobiography. Playing a queer character does not mean you owe anyone your personal story. And yet, in Kit's case, the line between fiction and reality got so blurred, he felt like he had to speak, just to make the noise stop. But we're not there yet. Let's not skip past what Heartstopper meant, not just to fans, but to him. In interviews, Kit often called the set of Heartstopper the safest place he'd ever worked. A crew full of queer creatives, a cast that felt like family, moments between takes where laughter flowed, music played, and no one had to pretend. For a while, it felt like freedom. He once said, "We felt like we were making something special, but we had no idea how special it would become." And that's the point, right? Sometimes a role comes to you at the right time. Sometimes it requires you to be more honest than you've ever been. Sometimes it changes your life. But what happens when the world decides to rewrite your story before you do? That's what happens next. And the price is much higher than anyone expected. Fame is a funny thing. One minute it gives you the platform of a lifetime. The next, it takes away your right to be quiet. When Heartstopper blew up in April 2022, Kit Connor found himself at the center of a beautiful storm. The world fell head over heels for Nick Nelson, and for Kit. He became an overnight sensation. His Instagram followers jumped from tens of thousands to millions. His face was on fan art, magazine covers, and global Netflix promos. But with the love came a tidal wave of assumptions. Suddenly, every move he made off-screen was treated like a clue. Every outfit, every photo, every friend. Was he gay? Was he straight? Was he bi? Was he queer? Why wouldn't he just say it? And here's the part that stings most. The people asking weren't just trolls. Many were LGBTQ+ fans, people who loved Heartstopper, who said they were allies, who insisted it was about representation. They claimed they were fighting for visibility, but ended up pressuring a teenager to out himself. Publicly, prematurely. Kit had just turned 18. He didn't lash out, he didn't complain, he didn't try to make a scene. He just went quiet. For a while, he avoided the noise. Didn't tweet. Posted less. Showed up to red carpets with the same gentle smile, but you could sense the shift. His eyes held more weight. His voice a little more cautious, like someone who'd been cracked open without consent. Then came the moment no one expected, and yet, in hindsight, it felt inevitable. On October 31st, 2022, Kit Connor posted a short, gut-wrenching tweet. "Back for a minute. I'm bi. Congrats for forcing an 18-year-old to out himself. I think some of you missed the point of the show. Bi." Just 20 words. That's all it took to flip the narrative. No press release, no cover story. Just a teenager typing into his phone, feeling cornered enough to say what he hadn't planned to share. Not like this. Not now. And suddenly, the same internet that had once begged for answers fell silent. The backlash turned inward. Fans apologized, critics backpedaled, celebrities voiced support. Alice Oseman, the creator of Heartstopper, tweeted, "I truly don't understand how people can watch Heartstopper and then gleefully spend their time speculating about sexualities and judging based on stereotypes. I hope all those people are embarrassed as F." But here's the thing. Damage doesn't disappear just because people regret it. That tweet wasn't a celebration. It wasn't a victory. It was a bruise. a scar, a public snapshot of a private wound, because Kit wasn't coming out with joy. He was coming out with resignation. And for anyone who's ever walked that line between knowing who you are and not feeling safe to say it, you know how devastating that can be. He didn't owe anyone that moment, and yet it was stolen from him anyway. In interviews that followed, rare and carefully chosen, Kit reflected on the experience with a maturity far beyond his years. He talked about the pressure, the hurt, the surreal contradiction of being applauded for playing a bisexual character while being hounded to prove he was allowed to, as if acting required a permission slip from real life. He once said, "It made me realize how performative some people's allyship can be. They say they support you, but only if you fit into their version of queer." And let's just pause on that, because that line, that hits hard. It reminds us that representation isn't just about casting. It's about empathy, about protecting people, especially young people, as they navigate who they are. For Kit, that journey was supposed to be personal, quiet, his. Instead, it became a headline. And in the days and weeks that followed his tweet, something changed. He stopped posting altogether. No selfies, no updates, no witty replies. He stepped back, not just from the fans, but from the fire, because being honest should feel like release. But for him, it felt like surrender, and that's the price of a spotlight you didn't ask for. You give the world your best work, your most vulnerable performance, and in return, they ask for more. Not from your character, from you. They want access, ownership. They want the private, not just the public, and they call it visibility. But what they really mean is control. So Kit walked away for a while, and maybe that was the healthiest thing he could have done. Because before he could continue playing Nick Nelson, he had to learn how to protect Kit Connor. There's something sacred about silence. Not the kind that comes from awkward pauses or unspoken tension, but the kind you choose. The kind you need. The kind that helps you breathe when the world won't stop shouting your name. After Kit Connor posted that 20-word tweet, raw, exhausted, and stripped bare, he disappeared. No follow-up, no press tour, no magazine spread talking about his brave journey, just silence. And in a world where everyone is expected to comment, to react, to explain, silence felt louder than any statement. You'd think the world would pause with him, give him space, a moment to reclaim what had been taken. But it didn't quite work that way. Sure, some fans apologized. Some media outlets ran headlines like "Kit Connor comes out as bisexual after online pressure." But even in that phrasing, after online pressure, there's a coldness, a distancing, like the same machine that pushed him to the edge was now pretending it had nothing to do with it. And while the world debated what had happened, Kit went quiet, for real. He stopped posting, stopped liking, stopped retweeting. His online presence faded to black. The boy who once posted about music he loved, silly behind-the-scenes clips, or supportive shout-outs to friends, went completely still, and no one really knew where he was emotionally. Because he didn't owe us that, but we could guess. Because we've seen this pattern before, haven't we? When someone young, vulnerable, and visible is handed a spotlight they didn't ask for, only to be consumed by it. We romanticize the idea of the reluctant icon, the quiet voice for a loud generation. But what we forget is that even the strongest voices need time to recover after being shouted over. Kit's silence wasn't avoidance, it wasn't dramatics, it was survival. In rare public appearances afterward, mostly related to Heartstopper Season 2 production, Kit showed up, smiled, said what was needed, and left. No extra words, no social media storms, just presence. And that told us something. It told us he was still here, but on his terms now. What made it even more complicated was how the internet began to reshape him. Not as a teen actor or even as Nick Nelson, but as a symbol, a queer icon, a reluctant hero. And here's the twist. Kit never wanted to be a symbol. He just wanted to act, to tell stories, to be allowed the same privacy any 18-year-old should have. But the world doesn't always let you choose what you become. So now, there were think pieces, debates, people saying things like, "Kit's bravery helped me come out." Kit represents the new queer masculinity. He's our generation's bi icon. And on one level, Yes, that's beautiful. It means he mattered, that his story reached people. But on another level, it's deeply unfair, because behind every label we assign, every pedestal we build, there's still a boy who never got to come out on his own terms, a boy who's still figuring things out, quietly, behind the eyes of a million strangers. Let's not mistake resonance for readiness. Just because someone's story echoes in you doesn't mean they were ready to share it in the first place. For months, Kit barely said anything about identity, queerness, or representation. Not because he didn't care, but maybe because he cared too much to say it casually. And when he did speak, very rarely, it was with surgical precision. In one interview, when asked about how he felt being seen as a queer figure, he paused, looked down and said, "I understand it, but I don't think I ever asked for that. I'm just trying to do my job and maybe protect a part of myself along the way." And maybe that's the line we all need to remember. He wasn't running from identity, he was protecting it. Because when something as personal as your sexuality becomes public property, you start to question what parts of yourself are even yours anymore. What do you hold on to when everything's been handed over? The truth is, Kit didn't vanish after coming out. He just recalibrated. He learned how to be in the room without giving away all of himself. He learned how to speak without explaining. He learned how to smile while still keeping his boundaries intact. And somewhere in that silence, a quiet form of power began to grow. Not the kind that trends or goes viral, but the kind that says, "I will not perform my pain for you, not again." Some fans missed the old Kit, the constantly online, effortlessly charming, quick-to-reply version. But the version that emerged from this quiet season, he was different, sharper, softer, stronger. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was reclaiming. So maybe silence wasn't a retreat. Maybe it was an evolution, because sometimes the bravest thing you can say is nothing at all. Silence didn't mean surrender. It meant Kit was building something quietly, patiently, and without performance. When he finally began to reemerge in early 23, it wasn't with fireworks. No splashy interviews, no long-winded captions, just presence. He returned the way a sunrise does, slowly, gently, with a quiet kind of power, and people noticed. The first major appearance that caught attention was the British GQ Men of the Year Awards in November 2022, where Kit walked the carpet with his usual understated confidence. Dressed in classic black with his curls just barely tamed, he looked poised but not polished to perfection. Still soft around the edges, still human. He didn't say much, he didn't need to. The moment spoke for itself. I'm still here. I'm still me. And I've survived something you may never fully understand. Behind the scenes, filming had quietly resumed for Heartstopper Season 2. And if you were watching closely, you could feel the shift, not just in Nick Nelson, but in Kit. He wasn't just playing the role anymore, he was anchoring it, holding space for a story that now echoed more personally than ever before. In interviews, Kit remained thoughtful, careful, measured. He never rushed an answer. He chose his words like someone who had been burned by every word before. But now, there was steel under the softness, a quiet clarity. One interviewer asked how it felt stepping back into Nick's shoes after everything. Kit simply said, "It felt heavier, but also more honest." Season 2 of Heartstopper premiered in August 20th, 23, and once again, the world watched. But this time, something was different. Nick's journey in the show mirrored Kit's real life more than ever, especially in how the character wrestled with labels, family, coming out to friends, and the fear of being misunderstood. There's one scene in particular, a tearful conversation between Nick and his mother, that felt like a mirror, a soft breakdown, a letting go. And the way Kit delivered that moment, it wasn't just acting, it was release. Critics praised his performance. Fans wept, and once again, Kit's name trended, not for scandal, not for speculation, but for how deeply he made people feel. But this time, the spotlight didn't swallow him. He had boundaries now. He did press, but only what mattered. He posed for shoots, but on his terms. He spoke when it served the story, not the spectacle. He stopped engaging with personal speculation, stopped defending himself, And somehow, without saying much, he said everything. That's the thing about Kit Connor. He doesn't need to shout. His silence, his pauses, his gaze, they carry meaning most people have to scream to achieve. But make no mistake, he was growing, not just in fame, but in presence. He was working on new projects, reading new scripts, collaborating with voices that respected his space. People stopped seeing him as a kid actor and started recognizing him as a leading man in the making. He once joked in a panel that he's always been an old soul. But maybe that wasn't a joke. Maybe it was the only way he could survive this industry. Because while most 19-year-olds are figuring out college roommates and part-time jobs, Kit was balancing global fame, queer identity politics, and his own emotional healing, all while still being expected to smile for cameras. And yet, he handled it. Not perfectly, not loudly, but gracefully. There was a softness to his comeback that felt refreshing in a culture obsessed with reinvention. He didn't rebrand. He didn't clap back. He just existed, fully, gently, on his own terms. And in doing so, he gave others permission to do the same. You didn't have to come out in a viral post. You didn't have to explain your labels to strangers. You didn't have to be perfect to be proud. All you had to do was show up. That's what Kit did. And somehow, in a world that demanded spectacle, he made quiet resilience look revolutionary. By mid-2023, even his online presence began to return, slowly, playfully, in his own rhythm. He posted about books he loved, music that moved him, co-stars he admired, no overexposure, no curated image, just bits of a life he was finally reclaiming. And his fans responded, not with interrogation, but with warmth. Not "what are you?" but "we're glad you're here." It was a shift you could feel. And maybe that's the legacy of his comeback, that healing doesn't always look like a speech. Sometimes it's just choosing every day to keep being soft in a world that tries to harden you. Kit wasn't loud, he was present. And presence, it turns out, is a kind of power all its own. Not every hero wears a cape. Some just hold their ground, quietly, stubbornly, with a softness that refuses to break. Kit Connor never set out to become a symbol. In fact, he resisted it. He never stood at a podium waving a flag, never declared himself a spokesperson, never performed pride. And yet, somehow through everything, the pressure, the silence, the comeback, he became exactly that, a new kind of queer hero. Not loud, not flawless, but real. Because in a world that's still learning how to accept softness in boys, fluidity in masculinity, and queerness without spectacle, Kit's very existence is an act of quiet revolution. He gave us something we didn't realize we needed. A story where a bisexual teen wasn't flamboyant or tragic or hypersexualized, but gentle, awkward, kind, a character like Nick Nelson, a boy like himself. And maybe the most radical thing Kit ever did was simply let that truth live on screen, and then step back. But don't mistake subtlety for inaction, because behind the scenes, Kit has consistently used his voice when it matters most. He's worked with Just Like Us, a United Kingdom-based LGBTQ+ charity focused on youth empowerment. He supported campaigns for inclusive education in schools, spoken out against harmful online behavior, and used his influence to amplify queer voices, especially those still struggling to be heard. And he doesn't do it for attention. In fact, most of it flies under the radar. He'll retweet a mental health resource during Pride Month. He'll thank a queer journalist who writes with compassion. He'll show up to an event not as a celebrity, but as a supporter, someone who's been there. And when Kit speaks, it lands, because he's not trying to win approval. He's trying to tell the truth. One of his most powerful interviews came in 2023, when he was asked what advice he had for young people struggling with identity. He paused, then said, "Don't rush it. Don't let anyone tell you what you are before you're ready to know. And even then, you don't owe anyone a label. Just be kind to yourself." That hit like lightning, because so many queer kids, especially boys, are taught to toughen up, pick a side, declare something. And here was Kit saying, you don't have to. You're allowed to unfold slowly. That message matters, because representation isn't just about who you see on screen, it's about how they carry themselves when the cameras are off. Kit may not be marching in parades or giving TED Talks, but his presence, his stillness, his boundaries, his quiet honesty gives young people permission to protect themselves too. To say, I'm not ready. To say, this part of me is not up for public debate. To say, I exist as I am, even if I'm still figuring it out. And that's powerful. It's also why so many Gen Z viewers don't just admire Kit, they relate to him, because he represents something rare, a queer narrative that isn't centered on pain or performance, but patience. He's not the loudest in the room, but he's the one people lean toward, and the ripple effect is real. Since Heartstopper debuted, countless young people have shared stories of coming out to friends, finding the courage to explore identity, or simply feeling less alone. And they name Kit, alongside Joe Locke, Yasmin Finney, and the rest of the cast, as the reason. They say things like, Nick Nelson helped me see myself. Kit made me feel valid without saying a word. I didn't even know bisexual boys existed on TV until him. Think about that. Not a speech, not a movement, just a boy being honest on screen, and slowly, gently in real life too. That's the kind of influence you can't manufacture. It's earned, moment by moment, by how someone moves through the world. And Kit moves with care. He supports his co-stars. He lifts up trans voices, especially Yasmin Finney, who plays Elle. He refuses to center himself in every conversation, even when he could. And that humility, that's what sets him apart. He's not trying to be the face of Gen Z queerness. He's just trying to make space for himself and for others. And maybe that's the lesson here. You don't have to be loud to make noise. You don't have to be polished to be powerful. You don't have to be everything to everyone to be enough. Sometimes the quietest presence in the room is the one that stays with you longest. And Kit Connor? He's staying. Not because he demands the spotlight, but because he carries light with him everywhere he goes. So maybe Kit Connor was never trying to be a voice for a generation. Maybe he just wanted to act, to feel, to tell the truth gently, without being asked to carry a flag he never claimed. But in his quiet strength, in his stillness, in the way he simply kept showing up, he gave people something rare. Permission. Permission to grow slowly, to speak softly, to come out when you decide the time is right. He reminded us that being visible doesn't have to mean being loud. That gentleness, too, can be powerful. And if you've watched this far, maybe you see it now. Not every hero needs a spotlight. Some just need space. So tell us, has someone ever made you feel seen, even in silence? Drop it in the comments. We'd love to hear your story.